The weather was bad. My physical condition was irritable, to say the least. Bandits were in the area. We struggled all day. The plane's engineering broke down, and the 19-minute bomb run was nightmarish. All of this, but I was still a God-fearing young man where flak was concerned. But all in all, it was absolutely a miserable day, and Gregor was gone. To this day, though, whenever I think I've had a bad day, I compare. September 5th, 1944. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning when we were aroused by the CO to go to the lead crew's pre-briefing at the war room in group headquarters. Breakfast at 05:30, general briefing at 06:30. Pulled ourselves out of the sack with a sigh and hastily dressed, for the morning was chilly as usual. The war room was brightly lit, and we were momentarily blinded as we stepped into the hut from the inky darkness outside. In the glare, we studied the night target charts, RAF, and the RF maps. We studied the target photographs until we knew them by heart, although we already had a plenty good idea of the area from previous target studies. The lead crew navigator picked up my briefcases by mistake. The leader's kit contained an extra map south of the target, while the deputies did not. At the time, this error meant nothing, but eventually this switch, though seemingly unimportant, was to be very instrumental in a man's death. Somehow I became separated from Gal and Vic Estes, our new bombardier, during all the checking out and signing. However, I rushed into the briefing room just seconds before the deadline. I was gratified to see the pilot and bombardier had saved me a seat. With the new crew, it's a miserable occupation, since we were group lead, while we had an assortment of command pilots riding in the right seats. Of course, Gal was the aircraft commander. Today we had a Captain Jaspers. Our crew, of course, would rather have had Walsh because any part of an integral team was missed. Fortresses of the 390th waddled awkwardly on the perimeter track. Although the B-17 was graceful in the air, she was a perfect bitch on the ground. It was more than a little difficult to maintain one's balance without seats with all these jerky stops. After a few minutes, this herky-jerky perimeter crawling, we approached the runway itself and paused for final check of the engines preparatory to takeoff. A few seconds later, a flare was fired from the central tower, indicating that the hour of departure had arrived. P-17 thundered down the strip, and all unanchored objects rolled to the rear. In spite of myself, I looked over Vic's shoulder through the transparent nose of the rapidly approaching trees and bushes at the runway's end. Then, through force of habit, I anxiously watched for the airspeed indicator steadily reading higher. Suddenly, unbelievably, the distasteful sense of acceleration vanished, and the ship became a creature of grace once again, restored to her rightful element. He leaned back in his seat and evidently had the target in his sights. 30 seconds later, the right nose window was blown out. Both Vic and I were sprayed with powdered glass. Simultaneously, the waist window and windshield were smashed. Vic was motionless after we'd been hit, so he didn't reply to my interphone query. I prepared to drop the bombs on salvo when the bomb sight indices crossed. However, just then Vic salvoed, and as I reached across the bomb panel, the plane lurched a bit as the bombs dropped. By this time, the flak was really blossoming in front of our group. With the bombs released, I really noticed the stuff for the first time. Concentration can be a blessing. It was a relief to be rid of the incendiary clusters, because firebombs are always a dangerous load. Just after bombs away, we turned sharply to the right and dropped 1,000 feet. I looked back, saw Strait and Horton, our number 2 and 3 men, catching absolute hell in the flak. I was feeling sorry for them, but above them, Gallagher had to feather our number 1 prop. And I noticed the number 2 engine was running low and was running raw and smoking. We had a bad fuel leak on the number 3 tank, according to the waist gunner, and routine post-target damage assessment. About this time, Gal had been forced to feather number 4, and suddenly I had my doubts about getting back home. Gushing out of the air intakes on the leading edges of the wings into the slipstream. Ekman called up from the ball turret in his regular damage assessment report and said that the oil was pouring from the number 2 nacelle and that there was bad fuel leaks from the 1, 3, and 4 fuel tanks. We were apparently losing 500 feet a minute just then. I was a little dubious about this last figure because I thought the instrument was suspect from the nose being blown out. However, after an hour of letting down, during which we dropped from 25,000 feet to 100 feet over the Greifensee, I was convinced that the altimeter was bent. It sure wasn't broken. Although neither Vic nor I was injured, each of us had some unconsequential cuts in the neck and a little bleeding. Not anywhere near Purple Heart's severity. At least we didn't have any gas or oil like the guys back in the waist. At the time, we were both below and behind our formation, since in addition to our altitude loss, we were only indicating 115 miles per hour, which meant we were roaring along at 70 knots ground speed. I was nevertheless slightly surprised at the finality of Jasper surrendering our group lead to the deputy lead. Obviously, we were going to be out of formation in a very short time, since we were only indicating 150 miles per hour. I soon calculated our loss of altitude at 500 feet per minute. We watched our group pull away without us, the correct but hard-hearted procedure. We were all alone. South of Stuttgart on the return route, it was only too obvious that we couldn't get anywhere near the Rhine. But instead we turned south toward Switzerland, although it was problematical if we'd even reached the Swiss. At least the wind on this heading was not as fierce. As we turned to a southerly course, the damp wind would blow us pretty far east of a southerly landing. I discovered that my map kit was short of any map south of 48 degrees north. I thought that a due south course from the point due south of Stuttgart might take us to the Zurich area. I hoped that my mental picture of northeastern Switzerland was somewhere close to being correct on the neutral Swiss border. While ahead of us, about 140 miles was the Nazi-Metz battle lines. At our rate of descent, we had about 45-second air time left. We were only indicating around 115 miles per hour, which gave us a 2 airspeed of 130 at our average altitude of 10,000. Without a headwind, our ground speed would be greater and the distance actually less. Then I realized with a sickening feeling that since Evans' navigator had taken the wrong briefcase, I had no map south of the 48th parallel. Luckily, the weather was crystal clear and I could see the Bodensee. We listened to all excess weight, guns, ammo, flak vests, helmets, and even the ball turret. Also, we burnt our bridges. We threw out Staff Sergeant Carr's tool chest. There was no more Framingham option. We didn't dare go back now. Previously, the boys had helped Ekman out of the ball turret, and then the oil and hydraulic fluid rushed through the hole where the ball turret had been. It was a very slippery deck over the earth far, far below. The two waist gunners, the ball gunner, and the tail gunner, formation control officer, were the greasy men in the back of the plane. A few minutes later, we approached what we hoped was the border, when 4 Mustangs joined us, a welcome escort. However, when Jaspers tried to contact them by radio, we found that also had been shot out. Then we started throwing our guns and the weight overboard. 4 of these beautiful little friends suddenly came out of nowhere and chandelled so we could identify them. It was sure good to have some favorite news for a change. At the moment I was checking the altimeter again while Gal was verifying the fuel supply at the moment. This was a moment of a crucial decision. Gallagher and Jaspers are trying to somehow figure if we should continue to change it, or should we bow to the inevitable while we still had the altitude to bail if necessary. Meanwhile, we planked and smoked our way south. What to do? After crossing over a few hills, we saw the beautiful Rhine and crossed the river and several pretty little islands at what I later figured was Stein am Rhein, just east of Schaffhausen. Continued on the same course. In the meantime, we were frantically scanning the countryside below for Zurich. At last I saw a large city, and just to make sure, there was the long, narrow lake of my memory from the war rooms map. We'd be more apt to spot Dubendorf if we were close enough to see any straight American or British bombers. At last we changed our heading over Frauenfeld and headed for Zurich, the city. We dropped our landing gear to land, but only one wheel would lock. Our hydraulic system was evidently also damaged. By this time, we had circled over a small lake in the area and dropped our bomb sight and radar into the water. By this time, we hadn't intentionally let down, but still we were only 2,000 feet. Between us and Zurich was a town called Winterthur, possibly halfway from Frauenfeld, or 5 miles. We had flown over Winterthur and looked back in time to see 4 Me-109s approaching at fast speed. Up on the flight deck, Jaspers evidently saw them too and sounded hot over the interphone. "Foe, you said this was Switzerland down there. What are those Me-109s doing?" "You know, of course, we don't have any guns." Just then another voice yelled into the interphone, "Holy shit, do you see this?" Then I heard Gal calmly say to stop yelling and tell him what he saw. Of course, by then the whole crew was watching the scene. About this time, 4 Me-109s approached us in a pursuit curve. The messes were Swiss, but they were an export model with only minor differences from the Luftwaffe version. Their crosses, the Nazi crosses, were black, became visible only when they came close. We had thrown guns, ball turrets, flak vests, anything of weight out of the plane, so we were pretty helpless. Then, as the Swiss fighters approached us in a combat maneuver, the 4 Mustangs dove on what they thought was 4 Nazis, coming down fast from out of the sun. The Swiss didn't have a chance. 2 of the 4 109s immediately went down in flames, and a flare was promptly fired. Mustangs then went on the deck to strafe the airfield, and then belatedly discovered they were on neutral airspace. They then hastily headed north with their damning film out of our lives. A P-51 had dove out of the sun, and the two of the 109s were on fire. One on the Dubendorf Strip, and the other plane was on fire over some woodlands in the south, over near Zurich. About then, another Mustang dove down to strafe the field. Then he promptly tumbled and probably pulled his nose up and headed toward England. This is unbelievable. Jasper should have notified our fighters that we were in Swiss airspace. Swiss fighters should have fired a flare back at Winterthur. What the Swiss brass was thinking when they used the Me-109s for escort duty on the German fort, I'll never know. We didn't know them, but the Swiss press did their damnedest to stir up an international incident. In Jasper's defense, he just might have radioed, although it was doubtful. Every paper I've seen, Jaspers is the bad guy, but he could be the goat. One Swiss pilot was dead, another one badly burnt, and 2 planes gone. We were nearly out of air, so we radioed a request to Dubendorf for a landing, which was granted. We dropped our classified equipment into the Greifensee just east of Zurich and came in on Dubendorf's turf. We had just stopped sliding, or maybe we hadn't quite stopped, when a tall Schweitzer opened the door and yelled, "You are in Switzerland, and we are neutral." The illusion continued. The Swiss uniforms looked German too. Dirty, greasy, grimy group of flyers stepped out of our plane. The hole where the ball turret had been sucked up lots of oil, and every step had to be delivered since everything was slippery from oil, etc. Even our big J on the vertical fin identifying our bomb group was covered with oil. That night we listened to Radio Zurich, and the American armies had a last stop near Colmar just before they reached the Rhine. Of course, we were a little sorry to hear this, but we were much better off here than we would have been there. Fibish translated the newscaster's report. Well, we had no choice. The wind made our decision this way. Well, I was